Hello, this is Charles Scoville, your Golden Harvest agronomist with your Agronomy in Action Focused Friday podcast here on September the 12th. Now let's get a heat unit accumulation update, talk about why our soybeans are looking purple from the roadside, and what's going on with all those dead soybean plants sticking their heads up through the canopy all of a sudden this week. So, as far as our current heat unit accumulation, basing it on a planting date of May the 1st, why, what a difference a week again can make. In the East Lansing area, we've now accumulated 2,242 heat units, but in comparison, we are behind 65 heat units from last year and down 44 heat units from the 5-year average. Now, going south to Coldwater, which of course is also reflective of my northern Indiana, northern Ohio areas, we're now 77 heat units behind last year and also 77 behind the 5-year average. But finally, going north to the Mount Pleasant area, there we are 75 heat units behind last year and 31 behind the 5-year average. So, as a whole, we continue to fall behind in heat units, but we do have some warmer weather in the forecast. So, as far as my travels this week, we are starting to wrap up field day season. This week it was steaks, barbecue, and pork chops. And though the food and the conversation has been awesome, I'm not sure how much more my waistline can handle. But more importantly, it just never ceases to amaze me how great the people are in our industry. Our seed advisors and customers are kind, friendly, good-hearted, and they're just generous beyond compare. I really do appreciate the opportunity to have that I have here, really, to be their agronomist and, to be invited onto their farms and into their communities to talk about the growing of their crops and just how to help better feed the world. Now, one of the most common questions I've gotten this week has been about the color of the maturing soybeans in the fields today. Now, some are still green, many are turning shades of yellow to brown, but the most interesting ones are those that are showing signs of purple. Now, when you look even closer, you'll see that the leaf stems and even the pods are purple in color. Now, the good news is that this really is nothing to worry about. As our soybean plants are maturing, it's not uncommon for extra sugars to build up in the plants after the beans have started to separate from the insides of the pods. When this happens, the plant sugars that would have gone into the beans simply back up into the plant structures and then cause this purple coloring in the plant itself. Now, this is similar to, that buildup of sugars we can see in the spring of the year in young corn plants or, in corn plants this time of the year, even that, we see at the edges of those fields where, unfortunately the deer have walked by and they've eaten off the ear and just left the stalk. Those plants too will turn purple due to the plant sugars that should have gone into the developing ears. And now, without the presence of that ear, the sugars just back up into that corn plant, turning it just completely purple from top to bottom. Now, as the soybean plants continue to mature, the leaves, they're going to drop and the plant color will simply turn to that gray or tawny color that each particular variety was meant to be genetically. But this purpling coloring can often be misidentified as Cercospora leaf blight. But that's not what I've been seeing lately in the fields across our area. For Cercospora, I'd expect to see the purpling on the leaves to show up in more of an interveinal pattern, and seeds would show a purple discoloration as they dry down for harvest. Now, the other big issues I've been seeing this week across my travels through northern Ohio, Indiana, and even central Michigan has been the presence of white mold showing up in our maturing soybean fields. Now, it's actually really easy to spot white mold this time of the year, yeah, even from the roadside, because of those scattered dead plants that they've all of a sudden are now showing and peeking up through that soybean canopy. Now, in some fields, I've seen it mainly in just the lower areas of the field, but in other areas, it's been more widespread across the field. Now, if you're asking yourself, what do I do now? The answer is simply you start planning for managing this problem for the next year. At this time of the year, the damage is already done. In fact, the damage started way back at the R1 or flower initiation stage of growing these soybeans. Now, for many of us, that was shortly after June 21st or the summer solstice. It was at a time when we did have more moisture that just helped those white mold spores spread within the soybean canopy, and then they landed on those newly developing flowers. And that is where the infection enters the soybean plant. And once it's in the plant, the damage has begun. Now, even if things get dry late season, like it has for most of us, the infection is already in the plants, and the potential for yield loss is already been determined. Now, as we plan for white mold management next year in these fields, my first recommendation is to plant corn. Now, when you do come back to soybeans in those fields, we need to first reduce our populations probably to a number less than you're comfortable with on your non white mold risk fields. Now, the goal is really to get more air and sunlight into the canopy at the time these spores are erupting, just to make a less favorable environment under the canopy for those spores to survive. So, you also want to select a variety that genetically shows some tolerance to white mold. We've got some really good choices at Golden Harvest for white mold tolerance, but remember, no variety is completely resistant. Now, if we're dealing with a field that has a perennial problem with white mold, then we need to consider, the application of a white mold specific fungicide at that R1 timing and to try to reduce the chance of getting it in these fields. Now, finally, in the highest risk fields, it's actually often recommended to spray a burner type herbicide over the top of these plants to burn off much of the current leaf canopy at or just before the R1 growth stage. Now, these plants, they'll regrow, and in a few weeks, they'll start to come back to life. But, boy, in the meantime, might want to consider taking a fishing trip or not just do anything but go back to look at those fields. White mold is a difficult issue to manage, and while left unmanaged, can have severe negative impacts on soybean yields. Now, if you're seeing white mold on your farm and you need some help putting together a management plan for future years, just feel free to give me or your Golden Harvest sales rep a call. Now, folks, as we wrap up this week's Agronomy in Action Focus Friday podcast, let's continue to get out there and walk our fields. Silage harvest is upon us. Soybean harvest will be here before we know it. And we will want to start walking our cornfields pretty shortly to look for stalk lodging risk, especially in those droughtier fields. I've already seen some of those fields where, the ears and the stalks have actually died weeks ago. So, this is Charles Scoville, your Golden Harvest agronomist, with your Agronomy in Action Focus Friday. Have a great week.